All right, today we are talking about 5-3 inverses. There is a very easy kind of definition we can assign to inverse. How to find an inverse? Switch x and y. If you can remember that, you're going to be good. Inverse means switch x and y. On several problems, it is literally just that easy. On others, there's a few more steps involved, but that concept-wise is what we're doing. We have to talk about notation, what the inverse looks like. So, we have a function, f of x. The inverse is written as f with a -1 of x. And that goes for any letter. If I had g of x, h of x, if I even just had a plain y, when you find the inverse, you introduce a -1. Here's how you read these. We already know this is f of x. That's how we say it. It is going to be very tempting to read this as f to the -1. That's not how you read it. That -1, it's not actually an exponent. It is just a symbol. That's it. The proper way to read this is the inverse of, and often I'll be lazy and just say the inverse of f. You can also say the inverse of f of x. Both ways are fine. But that's the proper way to say that when you see it. We're going to be using that notation quite a bit throughout the notes, so you'll get used to it with practice. Let's do some problems. We're going to start off with the easiest types. Inverse of a table or a set of points. They are done the same way, they just look a little different. Number 1, f of x equals, and we have 3 points here. So we're trying to find the inverse of f. So first we have f with the -1 of x. That's the inverse of f. Equals. Reminder, inverse just means switch x and y. That's exactly what we need to do. All of these points here, you should be well aware, they're all written as x comma y. That's what they represent. So for all 3 of these, we are literally going to switch the numbers in the spots for each point. So the inverse of f, first we have a curly bracket. I'm just copying it from above. And our first point here is going to be 2, 1. The second point is -4, 3. The third point is -8, -5. That's all you have to do. That's the answer. Let's do that again, but with a table. Again, same idea, just visually looks a little different. So as you can see, we have a table here, x, and this time we have g. And remember, the g column is the y column. They represent the same thing. So let's make our own table next to it. We have x in the left. And then on the right side, again, this is g. But since I'm finding the inverse, I'm going to use that inverse notation. So g with a -1 above it. Again, to take the inverse, we switch x and y. So we're going to flip these columns. The numbers in the x column in the left side are now going to go in the right side. And the numbers in the right side are now going to go in the left side. So I'm going to start with the left side first in my new table. So I'm going to copy down the right side into here. We have 9, 0, negative 9, negative 5, 0, 7. And now for the right side, I'm going to copy down the left side. Negative 3, negative 1, negative 4, 2, negative 10, 6. And that's our answer. That's all you have to do. Questions on tables and sets? Let's get to equations. These problems take a couple more steps than the ones above, but the concept is still the same. We have plenty of space here to do the work, but I have this space open. I'm going to write out steps as I go, so make sure you include that in your work. There's only 4 of them. What we want to be able to do is switch x and y. That's how you take an inverse. Well, I have to have a y first. If you look at my equation, I'll have a y in there. But remember, f of x is the same thing as y. So I just replace f with a y. Now that's going to be easier. Y equals, bring down the equation, negative 3x plus 4. And that was step 1. Rewrite as y equals, and then whatever comes after it. Step 2, now that I have x and y, I can take the inverse. Step 2, inverse, which means switch x and y. This is as easy as it sounds. Where the y is, you're going to put an x, and where the x is, you're going to put a y. Everything else stays where it's at. My new equation is x equals negative 3y plus 4. Step 3, this is the step that's going to take the longest of the 4. Solve for y. At first, y was by itself, and then now that we've switched, it's not by itself. We need to get it by itself again. So, for those of you who are new here, when I solve equations, I always draw a line down the middle. This is just to visually separate the left side from the right side. It helps organize work. If you don't like that, you don't have to write it down. This is just something I like to do. Reminder, we're trying to get y by itself here. That's the goal. First thing I'll move is that plus 4. Since it's a plus, I'm going to subtract 4 on both sides. 4 and minus 4, they're going to cancel. X minus 4, they are not like terms, so you can't actually combine them. So what do I write on the left side? X minus 4, exactly. It's not negative 4x, can't do that. They're not like terms, you can't subtract. Bring down negative 3y on the right side. We're almost done here. We have to get rid of the negative 3. When they're smushed together like this, that means they're being multiplied. So we just divide -3 on both sides. When you divide on the left side, divide everything by -3. So the whole thing is over -3. The -3's cancel on the right side. That leaves me with y equals, and then I'm just going to bring the left side down. Don't change anything about it. We can leave it like that. There is one more step. I'm going to put a star next to it. A lot of students forget this step. You want your problem to start and end the same way. So we started with f. We're going to end with f. We need to turn this y back into f. This equation we have found is the inverse equation. So when I bring back f, it's going to be f with the inverse notation of x. So we replace y with the f inverse, and then we're going to copy down the equation. X minus 4 divided by -3. This is our final answer. Computers closed, please. Thank you. So that final step, step 4, rewrite y as f inverse of x equals whatever the equation is from there. That is how you find the inverse of an equation. Questions on the process? This will take some practice, of course. All right, backside. I'm not going to write the steps out again, but I'm going to follow those exact steps as I go. Number 4. G of x equals x squared minus 5. First step, replace the g of x with y equals x squared minus 5. Now that we have y, we can switch x and y. Reminder before I write this, the only things that are changing are x and y. Everything else stays exactly where it's at. So I'm really focused on this squared here. It does not move with the x. It stays there. My new equation is x equals y squared minus 5. From here, I need to get y by itself again. First thing I can move is the -5. That's a minus 5, so I'm going to plus 5 on both sides. -5 plus 5, those are going to cancel. We just have y squared on the right side. Left side, again, we can't add x and 5. They're not like terms. So we just bring it down, x plus 5. All that's left to get rid of is the squared. We have y squared. What's the opposite of squaring a number? Square root. And we do it to both sides. One more thing, and I'm sure a lot of you have forgotten this by now. We talked about this last semester when we were doing completing the square. When you square root both sides, this side, the square and square root are going to cancel. So on the right side, the square root is actually gone, and it's just y. The right side, however, the square root stays. That side gets another symbol that goes in front of the square root. What is that symbol? Yes? Nope.
Plus to minus?
Yes, good. Plus or minus. You had half of it. That was good. Plus or minus goes in front of the square root. This is a growing pain. You just got to be disciplined and write it every time. Very easy to forget, though. So I'm just going to bring this whole thing down. Plus or minus the square root of x plus 5. Don't forget that last step, number 4. Y is solved for now. We started with g. We need to end with g. We're going to rewrite this y as g. Now we have to use the inverse symbol, so that -1 with the x to represent inverse of g equals, and then we'll copy over the equation. Plus or minus the square root of x plus 5. This is our answer. Questions after seeing the second problem? We're going to do one more of those equations for now. We'll do another one later. Number 5, h of x equals square root of x plus 5 minus 2. Again, step 1, we need a y to work with. So h is going to become y equals, bring down the equation, square root of x plus 5 minus 2. Now we can switch x and y. Again, they're just going to take each other's place. We now have x equals the square root of y plus 5 minus 2. And then we solve for y again. We can't just take the y out from under that square root. We're going to have to break that down slowly. So let's start on the outside. That -2 can be moved first. I'm going to add 2 to both sides. 2's cancel. Again, bring this down, x plus 2 equals, bring down square root of y plus 5 on the right side. Next, we have to get that square root out of the way. We can't move the 5 yet. It's stuck under that. Let's look back at the previous problem for just a moment. Reminder, squaring and square rooting are opposites. So when you have one, you're going to use the other to cancel. This time we have the square root, so we're going to use the square to cancel. So in parentheses, we're going to put the right side enclosed in parentheses with the square, and we'll do that to the left side as well. The square root and the square on the right side are going to cancel each other out. All that's left is the y plus 5 underneath. On the the left side, we just bring this whole thing down. X plus 2 squared. There's no plus or minus or anything like that when we do it this way. And we're not going to work this out. We're just going to keep it like this. Last thing that needs moved is a plus 5, so I'm going to minus 5 on both sides. 5's cancel on the right. We have y by itself now on the right side. Left side, do not subtract 2 and 5. Don't do 2 minus 5. Why can't I do that? Chase?
Parentheses.
Yes. The parentheses are holding that 2 where it's at. The -5 is not inside the parentheses. We're not going to put it there. It's going to hang out outside those parentheses. So, even though they're like terms, we can't actually combine them. It's just going to join the left side. We now have x plus 2 squared minus 5 equals y. Reminder, we have to start and end the same way. We started with h, we will end with h. So last thing we're going to do is turn this y back into an h. And this is now the inverse, so we use that -1 with the x equals, and then we'll copy down the equation. X plus 2 squared minus 5. That is our final answer. Questions over that problem, number 5. We have 2 more problems to do. Last section, finding the inverse and graphing. There is going to be graphing on this test, so we're going to have to do a little bit of practice with that. First, we're going to start off nice and easy with just a table problem. And this is where I mentioned earlier, I'm going to color code. So again, if you could have 2 different colors or a pencil and a pen, something like that. And I do have colored markers and pencils in the back of the room on that podium. If you want to go grab yourself one, that's fine with me. So number 6, we're given this function in this table. We need to find the inverse. And then once I found the inverse, then we'll graph both of them. For the inverse, we're going to need our own table. This time we just have x and y. We don't have an f or a g. So this time, to show that this is the inverse, I'm going to write y with that -1 to represent the inverse. To find the inverse, again, we just switch x and y. That's all we do. So we're going to flip these around. The top is going to go on the bottom, and the bottom is going to go on the top. I'll start with the top. On the top, we now have 0, 1, 0, 2. And on the bottom, I'm going to copy down the top. We have 1, 2, 3, 4. There's my new table. That's the inverse table. Now we will graph. These are just points. I'm going to write them in point form under the table as I graph. This is just me being a little extra. You don't necessarily have to do this. First point from the given function is 1, 0. So that's at 1 on the x-axis. Next point is 2, 1. Right 2, up 1. Next point is 3, 0. 3 on the x-axis. Last point is 4, 2. Right 4, up 2. I'm going to do the same thing for the inverse function. First point is 0, 1. Notice it's just flipped from the original one. So we're at 1 on the y-axis, just up 1. Next point is 1, 2. Right 1, up 2. Next point is 0, 3. That's just up 3. Last point, 2, 4. Right 2, up 4. This is why I recommended color, because if those are all the same color, kind of hard to tell apart. Not a huge deal though if you did it all in the same. So this is the basics of what we're doing here. We're going to do this one more time, but with an actual equation. number 7. Given the function y equals 1/4 x minus 2, we need to find the inverse function and then graph it. So first things first, let's find the inverse and then we'll graph both lines. I'm going to copy down the equation. Y equals 1/4 x minus 2. Luckily for us, there is just a y here. There's no f or g or h that we have to change. So we don't have to do step 1, which is change it to y. We've already got that. Next step, switch x and y. This is now x equals 1/4 y minus 2. And we need to get y by itself again. We'll do this in 2 steps. First, move the minus 2. Opposite is a plus 2. Both sides. 2's cancel. Left side, we just have x plus 2 equals 1/4 y. How do I get rid of a fraction that's attached to y? What's the step? What is it? That is essentially what I'm doing. There's a bit of mental gymnastics if I go through that way, so I'm going to skip to the final part, where essentially would be dividing by a 4th. But what does that mean? If I divide by a 4th, what am I actually going to do? Flip. Keep, change, flip in that regard. Multiply by the reciprocal. And you can do this no matter what your fraction is. So we're going to multiply by 4 over 1. That is how you cancel the fraction. So the 1/4 and the 4 over 1 are going to cancel, and we're left with just y. On the left side, because what you do to one side, you do to the other. We recognize that 4 over 1 is just 4, yes. Multiply by 4. When you do this, multiply the entire side by 4, not just the x. That is a very common mistake. Even my own pre-cal students will make this mistake. So try to avoid it. Multiply the entire side. So I'll be distributing the 4 into that expression. That becomes 4x plus 8, not plus 2. I've solved for y. This is my equation. Lastly, let's acknowledge that this is the inverse. So we're going to have y with the inverse attached to it, just a -1, equals, and then bring down the equation. 4x plus 8. Questions on finding the inverse before we start graphing? Let's graph the first equation, the given equation. Y equals 1/4 x minus 2. Reminder, this equation is in the form y equals mx plus b. That should definitely ring a bell. In this equation, m is 1/4 and b is -2. I'll do a quick review of how I graph using those numbers. That b is for begin. Where do I begin on my graph? Begin at -2. Where? Which -2? Which axis? Y-axis. Y-axis. There are plenty of students who will start on the x-axis. That is incorrect. We begin at -2 on the y-axis. From there, the M is for move. The 1/4 tells you how to move. Have a direction and a number. How do I move from here? Yeah? Move up 1 because it's rise over run, so 1 means up since it's positive. And then which way did you say with the 4? It's positive, so which way? Correct. This is up 1, right 4. They're both positive, so it's up and right. Those are my directions. So let's do that, get some extra points. Starting at the -2 on the y-axis, up 1, right 4. Up 1, right 4. I'll go ahead and talk about going backwards because I'm going to need it for the next line anyway. So we go up, right, I'm out of graph. So if I want to go backwards from the first point, what are my directions? Yes, you just go completely backwards. Instead of up, right, we'll go down, left. Down 1, left 4. Down 1, left 4. You only need, I'd say 3 points, but the more points you put on there, the better your graph is going to look. And then you have a ruler. I gave you one. So go ahead and take it and draw a nice straight line through those points. We're going to do that one more time. We got to graph the inverse function, and then we'll be done. Here's our equation. Y equals mx plus b. M is in front of the x. It's 4. 4 over 1. It's always better to have it as a fraction because it's rise over run. So if it's a whole number, just pop a 1 underneath it. B is the 8. Graphing our second line, B, we begin at 8 on the y-axis. And then our M tells us our slope. We move up 4 because it's positive and right 1. Problem, that goes off the graph. We have to go backwards. So instead of up and right, we'll go down 4 and left 1 to go backwards. Down 4, left 1. Down 4, left 1. Down 4, left 1. And then we'll draw our line. This is how your inverse graph should look. They should definitely cross. Should be able to see that pretty clearly. If you have something that looks parallel, mistakes were made. So make sure they cross. Make a nice little intersection there.